daily. I like the idea of the entrepreneurship which has been on play on the platform for a very long time. But from my experiences with going to NEDCO or any financial institution for information and so and assistance, you find the process is too drawn out. Yeah, and the citizen who goes there wants to open a business, they want to build on their skills and sell. You need to have a consultant or somebody looking into what they have to offer as the business. And I'm a person, I'm in political science, but I tend to go on the public transport and I listen to people, and there are lots of people who have skills and ability, but they do not know how to exploit further in creating a monetary value for what they have to offer. So I just suggest that idea. In the case of the other two presenters, I think the urban development, we need to look at that, and the idea is good, but we have to exploit right in Trinidad and Tobago. And the young man also had some good ideas, but I wouldn't go. So tying all up together and with our carnival, and so we need to draw in the 21st century much more out of what we can offer to develop our economy and serve the people. Thank you.
We have another, yes?
Hi, HU Center for Health Economics, Mrs. Halima Ali Sispin. If I get the name correct, Mr. Lashley. Okay, I just have a quick comment. You stated that you're proposing an alternative for sustainable development. But your last slide actually captures the essence and what I would consider the core of sustainable development itself. So I think what you're suggesting instead, and you can correct me and elaborate further, is that you are hoping to have the sustainable development pathways for the countries in the region and developing to be tailored via diaspora engagement. So I don't see it really as an alternative to sustainable development. I'm just seeing it as you adding probably a new dimension to the concept. Thank you.
Yes?
Okay, good morning everyone. My question is to the lady who presented on the cities for City of Chaguanas. Okay, so I'd like you to try and follow me a bit before I ask my question. If you can. I really have a problem with first world ideas being imposed on the Caribbean countries. This morning we heard about the HDI, which I have a serious problem with because things like HDI have been developed towards North America and Europe and stuff like that. And it's just being imposed on Caribbean islands. We're different. So I question your city branding. My reason for questioning is because you, again, use three first world examples. Berlin, which I believe is a capital city. Paris, which is another capital city. And New York. So, when I look at your population of Chaguanas, which is 83,000 people, representing out of 1.3 million, about 8.3%, I ask myself a couple of questions which I hope you could help me. In the Caribbean, cities basically have been places of trade. All the Caribbean islands, Barbados, Jamaica, etc., our capitals have been the major cities because that's where trade took place in our historical development. I don't know that Chaguanas is a city as yet. I believe it is still a borough. I stand to be corrected. But I'm really trying to understand this branding for Chaguanas. Where Chaguanas is situated, to get people to and from Chaguanas, I'd like to find out if in your urban development issues or urban planning issues, you all looked at the issue of carrying capacity. How many people can really fit in that space called Chaguanas, and whether it is sustainable? That's my first question. My second question is, in terms of the sites for tourism that you identified, I saw Lion House, which is one. You also have the Temple in the Sea, and you have the Murti in Central, in Chaguanas. Which, believe it or not, ma'am, when tourists come, and we bring tourists to Trinidad in large numbers, when cruise ships come in, when those cruise ships come, the city of Chaguanas is too far for that turnaround for those large numbers of people to benefit from the tourism in Chaguanas. The time it would take to get them there and get them back to their ships, it doesn't make sense. You ask the tourist transport associations whether they take tourists there. On those days, it doesn't happen. So, and my issue of current capacity is one, my issue of the location of Chaguanas in terms of large numbers of tourists visiting, except maybe around carnival time. And my third point has to do with, my third question has to do with whether, if you decide to brand Chaguanas as a city, do we then brand Port of Spain, and do we then brand San Fernando, and brand and cause division? Those are my three questions.
Do we have one more question for this one?
I think my question is for Dr. Bailey on entrepreneurship. You touched on NEDCO being one of the main sources for entrepreneurs to go to. Did you, in your research, did you get a chance to look at the venture capital as a form of funding entrepreneurs within the region, in Trinidad and Tobago? Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have now in terms of innovation. As an entrepreneur, you probably go to the bank or you go to the finance houses, but they're so risk averse in terms of lending to entrepreneurs that it stifles industries, as we were discussing previously. So instead of going to places like NEDCO, which is more state funded, what about the private sector getting involved through venture capital organizations or angel investors to push entrepreneurs? And how have you looked at this in terms of your research?
The process for engaging the agencies that are set up to support entrepreneurship, we are now getting that data. What we do at GEM is all about data. Is what will the data say? So we have just in this current cycle, we've just finished collecting data from these 2,000 people to get a feel of their experience with that engagement. And maybe next year I'll submit an abstract, and Mr. Franklin might be kind enough to allow a discussion of that data. Anecdotally, I mean, I've spent time with Mr. Mayers. I've seen how the thing operates. It looks pretty good, but you hear some people say one thing and hear other people say another. But let's see what the data says. So in a year's time, I'll be in a better position to respond to that. In terms of interestingly, again, in terms of knowledge or the conversion of a skill into a stream of revenue, which you said that you gathered from traveling in public transport and so on. Again, that is something that we may want to consider to see whether that is an obstacle. Certainly the APS data that we showed, or that we have, shows absolutely no challenge in this regard, but there may be challenges that people have of which they're not even aware. And it may be that we can include some kind of thing in the instrument in a future cycle to test this hypothesis, that there may be a set of skills out there that are not being converted into revenue streams because of a lack of knowledge. I've taken that point. With regard, there was a question about the nature of support, but I think I've covered that already in previous answer. Then with regard to the issue of banking, of financing entrepreneurship, again, I just presented highlights from a very large study here today, because we only have 15 minutes. But indeed, we do go into the availability and the nature of different kinds of finance. And we do have specific questions dealing with venture capital. And indeed, banks would be considered to be risk averse when it comes to entrepreneurs, but then that's what banks do. The banks lend money that belongs to other people. They have a certain risk appetite or risk aversion. This has traditionally been a problem. But what we are seeing in our data over time is that the finance issue is becoming less and less of a problem, as reported by the survey respondents, both on the APS and on the NES. We probably still have some way to go, but the data suggests that we have made some progress over the last 4 or 5 years. Again, there have been, as our review of the support agencies for entrepreneurship continues to be built. We're seeing things like new initiatives in business incubation, business incubators, some modifications to approaches in that area that are perhaps far more selective and far more deeply supportive of a smaller number of participants. And these are things that are likely to perhaps improve the entrepreneurial outcomes. Yeah, I think that would be my response.
Thank you. Mr. Lashley? I think there's a question that seeks some clarification. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the question. What I'm really trying to say is that in my observation, in my study, that we really take this idea of development from the West. We get this notion of development from the West, and these concepts that are given to us, that are sent down, passed down to us, we try to apply it holistically. And in my research, what I was saying that it's really incompatible with the idea of with small island development states. With the idea of small island development states, there's inherently that notion of limits and narrowness of resources, of land space, of economic capacity. So trying to apply a concept as sustainable development, which requires you to manage your resources in a way that it's enough for your present generation and your future generation, there's that kind of conflict in applying that concept of sustainable development. So in proposing diaspora engagement, I'm really asking for a reconceptualization of the idea of development, and also this is an alternative to development, as I see it as more applicable to small island development states where you can tap into resources, your diaspora, in terms of getting their tangible and intangible remittances. That being, you get their expertise, you are also can tap into their economic remittances, and also they are also aware of the issues in the country. So you're seeing that as a more appropriate approach to development, because they are aware of the issues in the country, so they have that general and genuine interest in seeing their country develop, their homeland develop, as well as also they have the resources, expertise, and economic know-how to finance development initiatives. So I'm really saying that yes, sustainable development is a good concept, but when you look at applying the concept to reality, there's a bit of tension, in my opinion.
Okay, and Ms. Chamberlain? Some questions in terms of carrying capacity, the distance to get to your cultural sites within Chabonas, and issues around the concept of branding of cities.
So I must thank you, ma'am. Your comments and questions are well appreciated. In terms of, so I'm going to try to capture all the items you would have spoken about. My study was done, contributed to my MSc that I did. So I chose a focal point. One, why I chose most of those developed European countries. One, in business, we tend to use benchmarks. So we need to start somewhere. Because throughout my reading, based on limited resources and time, I would have stumbled upon some aspects of branding in the Caribbean in terms of Jamaica. But there's no set approach. They had not identified that they have been doing branding, although I found some ingredients there. But to say there's an example that it exists in the Caribbean, I have not found any. This is open for consideration. That's why I made the statement that there's no fixed approach. Why I chose these countries particularly as a benchmark, a best practice, we are in nowhere close to the numbers and the capacity that they have. But the proposal is to start to construct an idea, because my study is to put this term out there in terms of Trinidad. We are situated basically as like a capital in the Caribbean in terms of our resources that exist and our capabilities. And one of your other items in terms of capacity, yes, I agree that there is a capacity, but what I look at is not just international tourists, but there's also local tourism. So based on population data I would have gathered and also spoken to persons in my network at university, I've been to international forums in the Caribbean. A lot of persons, Caribbean-wise, regionally, that travel to Trinidad, you would find Guyanese, Jamaicans, Surinamese. You find people that pass through Chaguanas as a shopping center. And in terms of your question where Chaguanas is not a city, it has not been identified as a city right now, but it is in a city in development. I've been working with, or in some initial discussions with the Chaguanas committee that are working towards transforming Chaguanas from a borough to a city status, but that's on another forum. The sustainability approach now, I had to correct you in terms of, I did not show a picture of the religious monument in Chaguanas, just the Lionhouse and a recreational center and a restaurant. Those were just to show some components that currently exist. I'm not saying that these are set factors in stone. It's again open for consideration. These would have been areas I would have identified during my study. And towards the sustainability approach, I just identify culture, infrastructure, identify areas that I found that currently exist. I'm not saying that we have to go with using these the Lionhouse as a cultural or historical monument. Maybe we can construct our own. But what I'm aware of so far in terms of the transit points is that they're looking at, and specifically to urban planning and in building infrastructure for access, they are looking at creating a traffic plan in terms of getting persons in and out and during high traffic period. But let's look at the question. Chaguanas is, Port of Spain is the capital city. Isn't there just one entry and one exit? But Chaguanas is centrally located between 2 points. So you can exit at both ends, enter and exit at both ends. So I know there are studies that have been done in terms of the risk or the challenge of having Port of Spain as the capital city. So I hope that answers in terms of your questions. And I can't remember what's the last area again?
She raised the issue of the branding of Port of Spain, branding of
Samson. In terms of branding cities now, again, this is just a snapshot of my overall study. I did suggest one, that if we intend to brand cities in Trinidad, we may look at maybe a collaborative approach. If Chaguanas is dominant in trading, Port of Spain is dominant in business investment and business climate, we look at what a particular city, borough, village, community might be dominant in, and try to use what we have, or our resources that we have, and brand towards it. So maybe that's why I said Chaguanas is the city of opportunity. Currently, there are 9 financial institutions. There are they're very dominant in that sector. Maybe we can look at financial, a financial sector, financial service sector there. So these are just general ideas I propose, but I really appreciate your points. So I hope that covered it.
We've got 5 minutes left, and so we'll entertain a few questions. I know you had one.
Good day again. My question is for Karen. It goes back to the current capacity issue, but from a different perspective. In terms of the population itself, right? And this is generally for all cities in Trinidad today. When we look around the world, we see cities, a place where people actually live, work, and play. Look at Port of Spain, downtown Port of Spain. Most of the population live on the outskirts of downtown Port of Spain, but in the heart of Port of Spain itself, government ministries, a few businesses, but everybody just come, go in at the evening, in the evening. Same thing with Chabonas. Most of the population live on the outskirts. So it comes to something what's a urban plan, right? And I don't think you address urban planning in your presentation because you're talking about city competitiveness and sustainability. Now, this is one thing that help address the issue of current capacity because now you will have multi-purpose building that are both serving an apartment for people to live in directly in the city and for government ministries to help in parking and removing of some of and increasing the urban space, providing more greenery and probably increasing the city ability to attract tourists because it's not as congested as it currently is. Right. This is just one of my points that I think you should include going forward in your presentation. And I would just, the last presenter, I really look forward to seeing the results of your research because this is one of the areas I think our country really needs to pay particular attention to. Because Carnival is just not mass in the street, but we need to really address how we present it to the world. Because when you take Soca-Mola, for example, I go Soca-Mola every year just it's the same thing you see no one over. What is the real production value that goes into producing Soca-Mola, right? And tourists come, because my aunts come from abroad to view it every year, and they constantly complain that they are not really getting value for their money. And this is general thing, is that we see the same thing over and over. So I really like to see more just not just in terms of mass, but in terms of the overall carnival and the value that it will actually bring and what is needed to actually change what we have currently to what we really need to become. Okay, thanks. Any question?
Question? Any other question or comment? Okay, so let me ask Ms. Chavan Singh to respond to that comment, and then I'll ask Dr. Moria to make a final comment in response to the point made by Israel.
Well, thanks again for your comment, but I got a little lost along the way when you were mentioning about the capacity and the urban planning. Again, I tried to marry the terms into where the government is doing planning initiative, and if you want to become more competitive or sustainable as a country and not just depend on our oil resource, what else can we do? So that's why I proposed the place branding approach, because throughout my reading and my travel, I would have noticed that a lot, place branding had not hit the Caribbean just yet. And I just went on the whim that being a first move, taking the economic approach of the first mover advantage and attempting to now integrate this place branding that is out there in the world. It is out there in the developed countries are using it. Our ancestor, our British colonial counterpart in Europe, they are using it. So if we would have inherited our urban planning systems from the said developed cities, why not use it as a benchmark now in improving and moving forward? Because we still, till today, use inherited approaches that are over 60, 80 years old. So why not adopt some growing practices and include it now, integrate it? I'm not saying change our urban planning systems that are currently exist. Things happen in phases. Rome was not built in one day. So That's why I said try integrating the place branding approach into our urban planning through our national spatial plan, where you start building on components. If you want a particular city now, you don't just go and build buildings, create road infrastructure just haphazardly because you see a growing population in one area. You say, well, let's widen the road. Let's have a focal point to work with. Let's say, let's Chaguanas or even San Fernando. Let it be a shopping capital. Then what do? There's a lot of planning. You want to have residents, yes. You want to have a place to go to work, go to school. You are right. I myself a victim of working in Port of Spain and being a resident of Chaguanas. The commute is 2.5 hours, morning and afternoon. So what can we do now to improve if we choose a goal where we want to create trading, buying practices? There are a lot of building, communication, infrastructure, health. There's a lot of planning, but it's only one person here doing the research. So again, I was open to limitations. So thank you.
If you pass the microphone to Dr. Moran so that he can make a final comment.
Yeah, I agree with you that that's something that needs to be done. One of the things that the Department of Creative and Festival Arts does every year is that they bring back the traditional characters of Carnival, so that we could continue educating people about the real Carnival. So I think that if we reevaluate the way we present Carnival to the world as a strategy to attract, to create a market, then those things come to place. It's like, how can we be different from the rest? And that's when people begin to develop an idea of how they are repeating Brazil's Carnival, for example. So we cannot be better than Brazil in the way they do their Carnival, but we can be the best in the way Carnival is supposed to be done here. And so I agree with you, and it's just a matter of reevaluating those different scenarios.